The one and only Shawn Murray is back once again. He's got big plans for his next game, and you know what? He can't wait to tell you all about them. If you happen to miss the news at the Game Awards this year, Hello Games revealed their latest project, a new, highly ambitious, surprise, surprise, open world fantasy multiplayer survival game that goes by the name Light No Fire. Now, officially, what they say about the game is Light No Fire is a game about adventure, building, survival, and exploration together. Set on a fantasy planet the size of Earth, it brings the depth of a role-playing game to the freedom of a survival sandbox. Now, when revealing Light No Fire, here is what Shawn Murray, otherwise known as Mr. Undersell and Overdeliver, had to say about the game.
What people don't know is that for the last 5 years, we've been working on something new.
Another game.
Yeah, something very different, something maybe more ambitious, you know, for...
Here we go.
I actually love that Keeley couldn't help but just laugh about that. I mean, what else are you gonna do, right? After the debacle that was No Man's Sky, you have to laugh when Shawn Murray comes on stage and he says he's making a more ambitious game than the last one.
Tell us a bit about it, Shawn.
For No Man's Sky, we generated a whole universe of kind of sparse, alien-looking planets. For our new game, we wanted to create an Earth, a planet that is as varied as a universe. Something with, you know, mountains, real mountains, not video game mountains.
Like what exactly? Of course, I mean, they're still video game mountains, but I get what I get what he's saying here because he extrapolates.
Mountains that are miles high, taller than Everest, that when you climb to the top of them and look out, you can see rivers and canyons and continents. You know, you can see oceans.
So is this like an open world planet kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, the first real open world. Right?
Oh my God, dude, he can't help himself. I'm convinced at this point that he can't help himself in calling their next game the first real open world game. I understand what he's getting at though, because he's saying that they're actually crafting a whole planet and like it will be the first fully open world, but is that even true? Have there not been fully realized planets? I mean, there's like No Man's Sky is full of fully realized planets. Starfield wasn't, but that's another story.
Something without boundaries. And we're going to let everyone play in it together. You know, a place where people can live out their sort of adventures together.
So look, I know what we're all immediately thinking, right? Here he is, Shawn Murray back on stage, really drumming up hype about his game, saying it's like, well, there's actually a few interesting things that came out of this, a few things that I really want to highlight on here. So first of all, he says that the game is more ambitious than No Man's Sky, which is of course interesting given the fact that this will be focusing on one single planet rather than an entire universe full of planets. But while No Man's Sky is certainly a big game, there's no question about that, it's also in a lot of ways shallow with a lot of repetitive, just a lot of repetitiveness to it, to the planets, to the things on the planets, to the biomes on the planets. It's been fleshed out over the years, but definitely if I were to condense the No Man's Sky experience, I would say a very, very wide and shallow versus very narrow and deep or any other combination in between. So I presume when he says that Light No Fire is more ambitious than No Man's Sky, he's probably referring to a bigger focus on detail and depth within that single planet. In fact, his next claim is that the game is Earth-sized, bigger than Earth. In fact, an entire planet that will be as varied as a universe with mile-high mountains that from the top you could see rivers, canyons, oceans, and continents. Again, really selling pretty hard here. And then, you know, there's that quote, you can't ignore it, when he says this is the first real open world. Like, again, dude, he can't help himself. That has to be the case. It's got to be compulsive, really. Something without boundaries is interesting to me because that obviously points to the idea that this whole planet will have no loading screens to it while you're exploring. And then also that one line where he states that we're gonna let everyone play in it together. It kind of alludes to the idea that this is one single shared world. You know, it may very likely, almost certainly will have some sort of phasing, but the idea that we're all on this one planet exploring together. And I do believe, sort of like No Man's Sky, they also are gonna have this discovery element to the game where when you find things, you can name them, and then that mountaintop, that river, that whatever things will be nameable for everyone who comes across it, whoever conquered it for the very first time. So what do we know about the game besides this initial introduction? Well, taking a look at the Steam page sheds a bit more light on exactly what we can expect. The list of features include, this is a multiplayer Earth, as mentioned. We will meet players from around the globe, build a life, explore, and survive together, constructing persistent buildings and communities. That is really interesting. If this is one shared world, world, and these are persistent buildings. The idea is if I build a base at the foot of a mountain and you eventually come across that mountain yourself, you would see the same base that I built. That's a cool idea. The game was procedurally constructed, which of course it is when you're talking about things of a scale like this, of actually building something with the surface area of the Earth or larger. Procedural generation is going to be involved in that. They say it is a truly open world with no boundaries at a scale never attempted before, a massively varied and dense planet filled with immersive biomes, unique elements, and valuable resources. It's also fantasy, whereas No Man's Sky was sci-fi. Light No Fire is fantasy slanted. It's going to present us with this ancient Earth to uncover, one where we are not the hero. Love to hear that. Just make me a regular old humdrum guy who's got to go through various challenges. That's part of what makes the experience really enjoyable. They've also mentioned that the game will be thick with lore, mystery, and a constant fight for survival. I would say one of the most obvious things that are lacking in No Man's Sky, again, with the caveat that they have added stuff over the years, but even with those additions, I would consider No Man's Sky very light on the narrative elements. It is more like a space exploration sandbox, like gathering resources, using that to craft things, whether it be bases or your items, the components of your ship, your weapons, all that stuff. It's like an exploration, gathering, crafting game with like survival elements and even full-on survival game modes. But it seems like with this game, they're going to have more of an emphasis on lore and storytelling. And then the last bullet point on the Steam page is mentioning that this is an unexplored Earth, and this really leans into the idea that there's a possibility that they go with some sort of a claiming and naming system. As players explore the planet, that there will be an element of, hey, if you do a certain thing, you can actually name it. So if you climb to the top of the mountain, if you're the first person to do that, you can name that mountain. And I'm assuming there's going to be some constraints so that this doesn't get too out of hand. But yeah, they say every mountain can be climbed and below them lie endless vistas, oceans and continents perhaps no others have seen. Who will climb to the tallest mountains? Who will find the deepest sea? Now, beyond this description, we of course have the announcement trailer. It was roughly 2 minutes in total, and while brief, it did give and show off quite a few systems, mechanics, and features that got revealed here. It appears like there will be full-on survival systems. We see a few examples of players gathering resources and even doing full-on base building at one point. We see a player what appears to be doing the construction of a wall for a building that they're working on. We also very, very briefly, they were super short clips, but we did see combat. We saw both melee and ranged action combat. They were super brief, but I really hope, if anything, I hope this is a big focus over No Man's Sky, is that they try to make a good feeling combat system, because No Man's Sky's multi-tool combat never felt particularly amazing. It was serviceable, but certainly wasn't a main draw for the game. I hope combat gets much more of an emphasis here in Light No Fire. Also, it seems like magic would be likely given the game's fantasy setting, and we have seen characters with staffs in the footage. Besides the obvious showcase of the flying mounts, other forms of transportation displayed here were gliders, land mounts, and even boats. It's also clear that yes, there's going to be a lot of different biomes. We saw a few of those in this footage, including the very tall mountains that Shawn was happy to mention, and they do appear like they are very tall mountains that you can climb. There were some clips with underwater gameplay. We saw characters swimming. We also saw several playable races. Besides humans, there looks to be a wide variety of animals that you can play as. These include things like rabbits, foxes, bears, frogs, many, many more. We saw a few different types of enemies, including skeletons, and there was a clip of that one massive crab. And also, we see what looked to be party sizes of at least 4. We saw as many as 10 characters in frame at a single time, specifically that scene where a group walks into that temple looking thing. And we know that potentially they could support at least like somewhere around 32 players. That is at least the multiplayer cap in No Man's Sky. But then also there have been the hints that the multiplayer could expand far beyond that and be at a larger scale, beyond what was in the Steam description and then what Shawn said in that initial interview. We saw a news post where they said this thing specifically: as kids, we always loved the maps at the start of great fantasy books. Earthsea, Narnia, Middle-earth, and Westeros. Whole worlds. Well, this is our fantasy planet, a single planet we are going to let everyone play on together to explore and adventure. If not explicitly, that definitely hints at the idea that yes, we're all going to be sharing this one space. There would most certainly be phasing. I would have to assume that there are phasing and we can't gather 10,000 people on top of the same mountain. I'm not assuming that is going to be the case. They will be doing some, there'll be many servers, and then they will group you with players and have them come into and out of existence, or when you group over the players and actually have a physical group formed, you'll all stick together in the same instance. That's what I'm presuming is going to happen here. But the play space, the idea here is that the play space will be the same for everyone. So again, we keep saying it, but if I discover and name a mountain, if you come across that same mountain, you would see it with the name that I gave it. So that is a really cool idea and premise. Now, in the interview, again, we also noticed that Shawn said that they had been working on this project for 5 years. Now, I found a thread on the game's subreddit where someone actually went back to look for various times that Shawn Murray had mentioned the game's development over the course of this past 5 years. So here's a rough overview of that timeline. We know that in March 2017, Hello Games announced Hello Labs, which they were calling an initiative to develop projects focused on procedural world generation and experimental games research. And this is very likely where the initial concept for Light No Fire started coming together. Now, according to Shawn's 5 years of development statement, around sometime in or around 2018 is likely when Light No Fire began its development. We know in April 2019, speaking with Games Radar, we got the first official mention of this game where Shawn said, "We're also starting on something new, which is big, ambitious, and silly, but we're still a very small team. We do quite a lot between us, but I think that's because we are all so into it." Later that year in July, Shawn said they were actually initially planning on making a relatively small game, but plans shifted and they instead decided to follow No Man's Sky with another, quote, crazy and ambitious game, which he said at the time of that interview was still in early incubation and prototype stages. Now, in September 2020, in an interview with IGN, Shawn said that after what happened with the launch of No Man's Sky, I'm sure we all remember, it was quite a bit of a mess. He didn't want to talk about their next big game too early, but he did reiterate that as a studio, they were definitely focused on doing something new, big, and ambitious once again. Then, in April 2022, speaking once more to IGN, Shawn discussed how Light No Fire is a game that, like No Man's Sky, would almost seem impossible even with a 1,000-person studio. However, as we know, that studio is still quite small. Hello Games, last I heard official accounting of it, was still under 50 people total because they are a studio that really focuses on the use of procedural tech, using that to their advantage, and that is definitely going to apply here in Light No Fire as it did in No Man's Sky. And then obviously, just last December, that is when we got the official reveal of Light No Fire. So your next question might be, here in the news about this game and everything that we have covered thus far, when is it coming out? Well, there's no announced year even at the moment, which typically means it won't be happening in our current year, but that's not always the case. There are people who are speculating with them showing so much varied gameplay in that initial announcement trailer that it could be coming out sooner than expected, and Shawn himself did say that he doesn't want to reveal and talk about this game too early, but I would be very surprised if we got a release in 2024, because on the Steam page, where usually if a game's announcement is coming in the relatively near future, the release date will be listed as coming soon. They don't even have that. It's currently listed as to be announced. So I'm keeping my expectations in line with that time schedule for the time being. I'm going to assume at the earliest this game's releasing in 2025. They've also not even officially announced the platforms, if you can believe it. Like, obviously, yes, it's coming to PC because the Steam page exists, but they haven't announced what, if any, consoles it would be coming to. Now, obviously, they're not going to exclude consoles. I think it's just a question of what generations of consoles that Light No Fire is going to be coming to. So with all of this said, with all of this covered, yeah, I mean, I think Light No Fire looks pretty cool, but we certainly at the same time have every right to be skeptical, with Shawn Murray once again stepping on stage making grandiose claims about one of his upcoming games. Yeah, it's given me a serious case of deja vu, no question. Although I will say this time around, there are a few things that are different than the last time. For one, you know, prior to releasing No Man's Sky, Hello Games was a very small studio who had only ever made pretty small games. But this time around, when they make a claim to have this massive, ambitious game in the works, well, now they have proof that they can do it. For as much of a mess as No Man's Sky was at release, and make no qualms about it, it was a total and complete mess. It totally underdelivered. It was the opposite of what I said earlier. They oversold and underdelivered. That is exactly what happened with No Man's Sky. But in the time since, they have a well-documented turnaround for the game. It is in a very good spot right now, and it got there, and this is probably the best thing of all, it got there via consistent 100% free updates. The game's gotten totally free updates over these past few years. If you bought the game at launch, you can play all of the updates that have come in 8 years of time without spending a single penny. No paid expansions, no paid DLC, nothing like that. That's the right way to do it when you underdeliver on a game, but as we all know, and we've seen time and time again, most studios, most developers will not do that. They'll fix the game, but you'll pay them for it in the process. So it might have taken a while, but No Man's Sky has actually turned around, and it's now a massive, certainly successful, and by all accounts beloved good game at the moment. You take a look at recent Steam reviews and total Steam reviews, it's positive. It's very positive. So people enjoy this game, and from what I gather, the game has a fairly large portion of its player base on the consoles as well, the Steam PC player base aside. And another thing I would say that's definitely working in Light No Fire's favor is that they are clearly building on the foundation of their last game. In fact, so much of the reveal trailer looked almost exactly like No Man's Sky to me. If you had told me it was a No Man's Sky community mod, I actually almost would have believed you, especially things like that underwater clip. I mean, if shown with no context, I actually would have assumed this was No Man's Sky, but also even things like the flying mount. Like, yes, it's a dragon and not a spaceship, but the way the dragon lifts off from being on the ground into landing position and then momentarily pauses right before taking off into flight, that is like the exact range of motion that ships do when they take off in No Man's Sky, like exactly the same. It's hilarious. But the point is, it's pretty obvious that a lot of the work that they've put into No Man's Sky over the past decade plus. That game launched 8 years ago, but it was in development prior to that, obviously. We have a decade plus of No Man's Sky, tech, learning, systems, features, mechanics, things under the hood. Clearly, much of that is being utilized and taken advantage here in Light No Fire, and I think that gives Light No Fire and makes it much more likely to live up to whatever it is they're going to promise between now and the game's official release. So I definitely approach this with caution, obviously, but I do think the odds are way more in the favor of Light No Fire, and I think there's a very high chance that it performs better than No Man's Sky does. And specifically, I'm just talking about the game that they deliver at release to what they say it's going to be prior to release. I'm assuming those two things are going to be way closer together than what they were with No Man's Sky, but we'll have to, of course, see. The hope this time around is that, if anything, they will rein in the scope of what they're promising and then actually fully deliver on the scope of what they promise when it comes time for us to pay for the game. TLDR, to wrap the whole thing up, Light No Fire looks really cool. I love the setting and the premise. We should be very cautious, but we're going to hope for the best, and let's see how it all pans out. That's going to do it for me today, guys. Thank you, as always, so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time. Take it easy.